This week on the Hollywood and Toto podcast, we explain why the number one scapegoat in America, Rachel Zegler of Snow White fame, may not be completely responsible for what's going on with that particular film. Trust me, there's more than meets the eye to this story. And we speak to producer Mark Joseph about his new book, Making Reagan. It is, of course, the making of the Reagan movie, which came out last year. And if you thought that most movies struggle to get to theaters, they hit roadblocks along the way, you ain't seen nothing yet. It's a miracle that Reagan came to theaters, and Mark's going to share some of those miracles coming up.
Welcome to the Hollywood and Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Rachel Zegler is having an awful, terrible, no good month, no doubt. Her new film, Snow White, is underperforming at the box office. The critics, even liberal critics, seem to hate it. I didn't. I'm in the minority. Audiences are staying away in droves. The social media buzz on it has been nothing but negative. The cinema score was not good enough to really give this movie the kind of legs it needs to survive at the box office. All bad news. And that was before Disney whispered in the ear of a major publication and basically threw Rachel Zegler under the bus. And then, of course, the media took that, ran over her a few more times on the rhetorical bus. Just not a good time for Rachel Zegler. And she deserves it. She's an actress in a major movie. She's getting paid handsomely. And she spent a long time trashing both the source material, weird, stalkery, you know the drill, and also telling Trump voters they should never know peace. She also talked about being paid more for being in costume as her character, and other quotes that just didn't sit right with much of anyone, honestly.
I mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
But is it wholly her fault? Now, let's put aside the dwarf debacle and the little people situation that plagued the movie in recent months. But wasn't Rachel Zegler just doing what she's told? Just basically reading the script that's been handed to both her and other young performers for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years? I think that's the case.
You will read the script that we give you, and you will show up tomorrow happy.
I mean, when you think of it, is she the only actress who's been very vocal about Donald Trump, who has insulted the people who voted for him? I don't think so.
Yeah, because he thinks he's a gangster. He does everything like a gangster. I don't think that gangsters in that world would think much of him.
That seems pretty darn normal in Hollywood. Is he the only actor who said, you know what, we're remaking this project, but the source material, it's old, it's stuffy, it's too much a product of the patriarchy. We're going to change it and update it. Is she the only person who has said that? Is she the only star who has just actually tried to be a victim despite their beauty and their fame and all the wealth that's coming to them? No, she's not the only star by a long shot. And in fact, I think she's pretty darn normal by modern Hollywood standards. And yet she's been singled out. She's been thrown under the bus. She's been targeted by a major studio and by the journalists who covered that studio in recent weeks. Again, she is partially to blame here. She's an adult. She said the things that she said. I get that. But she's part of a larger ecosystem that makes the stars say these kind of things. Now, before I go on any further, I want to mention that I didn't come up with this idea specifically. This is actually John Cass, who's a great Chicago-based columnist. I was talking with him recently along with host Dan Proft. They're on Chicago's Morning Answer radio show. And the subject of Snow White came up and we went there. And he said quite early in the conversation, this is just the normal. This is just the way Hollywood actors speak. And he's absolutely right. So I wanted to expound upon it here, but I also wanted to give him credit because I don't want to just steal that idea. It's a good one. He's right. But I just want to get that clear. So, one of the things that leaves us with the whole situation is what happens next. I mean, do stars watch what they say? Are they more careful on the red carpet in these situations? Will they be less likely to trash Donald Trump or any political party? You could go bonkers on people on the left and say, they're terrible, they're awful, they're this and that. And then would people on the left want to rush out and see that particular movie? I think not. Now, listen, the stars have been doing this for quite some time, as I said, but they haven't been punished like Rachel Zegler has been punished. They haven't been singled out by a massive movie studio like Disney. That's the difference here. And that's why I think this particular situation, Snow White Gate, might want to call it, it might leave a mark. It might tell people in Hollywood, hey, be careful what you say next time. Now, before we close out this chapter, I want to just say, stars can say whatever they want.
It's all about freedom, man, like this.
This is America. We have free speech. No one's going to jail. But if you're an actor and you're rebooting a beloved property, you shouldn't really trash said beloved property. I always remember years ago when Drew Barrymore was talking about Charlie's Angels. She was remaking the series, making it into a feature film, and she spoke so cartoonishly lovingly about the source material. And I grew up on Charlie's Angel. It's pretty frothy. It's pretty silly. It's not fine art, but she had a real reverence and an admiration for it, and she wanted to bring that to theaters. And maybe that's why those two particular films were so successful. Well, how hard is that? And more importantly, if you're out in the publicity market, if you are talking to journalists and Stephen Colbert and doing the red carpet shtick, how hard is it not to say this particular party and this particular voter is not only, I'm not in agreement with them, but they might be bad people or they might be supporting a terrible cause. I mean, it just seems like a terrible idea. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't say that, doesn't mean that they shouldn't say that per se, but when you're on the publicity trail, when you're trying to get more people to come into the theaters, it's probably the worst way to go about it. Or, as Rachel Zegler might say, it's a little weird. Mark Joseph had a not so crazy idea a while ago. Why don't we make a movie about President Ronald Reagan? There's been no major movie about him. There's a mini series. There have been other references to Reagan over the years on screens large and small, but not a full-bodied biopic. And the fact that Mark Joseph is a film producer, well, he's just the guy to make that happen. Well, it's a great idea. It was a great pitch. It's something we need. And making it happen was nothing less than brutal for a very, very long time. Actors coming in and out of the project, directors coming in and out of the project, funding coming and going, so many obstacles, so many hard luck situations. And then, of course, you throw in COVID-19.
Put your mask on, princess.
I mean, making this movie was just an act of sheer will. And thankfully, Mark Joseph had that will to get the job done. Of course, the movie came out last year with Dennis Quaid. People seem to like it quite a bit. 98% approval on RottenTomatoes.com from audiences. Critics were far less kind, but, it was a right-leaning guy, a GOP icon, just some political bias going on there, I think. I don't think that's too far a stretch. But the fact that the film exists at all is a testament to Mark and his dream to make this a reality. And now there's a book about that whole process. It's called, of course, Making Reagan. It's available right now in bookstores everywhere. And it shows how many obstacles he had to leap over to make this movie happen. Quite a few. I don't know how he stuck with it. I think any sane person would have said, okay, the universe has given me a sign, I'm out. Mark never quit in the movie. And of course, the results speak for itself. So I want to share his story, Making Reagan the book, and of course, his work as a producer with you all this week. Now, just a quick note, the beginning of this conversation gets snipped away. There was a little bit of a video hiccup. I'm still learning the tricks of my trade, so forgive that, but you don't miss much. It jumps right into the conversation. You'll be fine, but just know it doesn't start in the usual smooth fashion. So enjoy my chat with Mark Joseph. And if you've got a teenager who's thinking about joining Hollywood, becoming a screenwriter, maybe trying acting on for size, this is the mother of all cautionary tales. It will be impossibly hard for many, many people. But you know what? If it's your dream, if it's your goal, it's your ambition, you've got a prayer in your mind to make it happen. It can happen. And Mark Joseph is proof of just that.
Your viewers and listeners, it's myself, my wife, and 4 young daughters, like aged 1 to 6 or something like that. We're not people that are going to harm or threaten anybody. Driving along either to or back from my cousin's wedding. And I'm suddenly I see the flashing lights. I'm pulled over. Oh, shoot, no. But I'm driving a minivan. I don't think I'm really doing anything wrong. But the officer comes over. He's a very, very young officer. And I notice his hands are kind of shaking. It's like his first day on the job or something. And he says, you were speeding. And I said, I was? And he says, yeah, you were going 65 in a 45 zone. And that's 20 miles above. That's a big deal in this area. And I was like, it was? It just said 65 a few minutes. He goes, well, but it's a whatever. Anyway, so he's writing the ticket out, and I figure, okay, I'll pay my fine of, $100 or whatever it is. And he says, it says in the ticket, as I look at it, he hands it to me, it says, you must appear in court in person a month from now. And, not to be a wiseacre LA guy, but, I'm like, listen, I live in Los Angeles, and I don't think I can come back in a month. Can I just pay the ticket and be done with it? He goes, oh, no, this is, you have to appear in court in person. So now I'm like, I'm in trouble here. What do I do? He says, well, if you call in, maybe they'll let you come tomorrow instead. So I call in, and they said, you've got to appear in court tomorrow, in person before the judge, and plea your case. I'm like, am I on an all? Is this like the end of a Seinfeld episode or something where they all end up in jail? So, but the weird part was, I look at the ticket, and it says, you must appear in court in Dixon, Illinois. And I know enough about Ronald Reagan to know that's Ronald Reagan's hometown. So I'm trying to piece this together in my mind. I've been pulled over for speeding, and I'm forced to spend the night in Dixon, Illinois, with my wife and 4 children, and go before a judge, and I don't know what's going to happen. Again, I'm thinking Seinfeld last episode. So we've got the day to kill. I've got nothing to do, and so we just decide to make the best of it, and I take all my kids to his boyhood home, which I'd never been to before, the river where he saved lives and all that stuff, and just did the full Ronald Reagan tour against my will. So the next day I go before the judge, and just for fun, I asked my wife, hey, just for fun, let's go the speed limit and find out what happens. And so I went 45, and all those nice Illinois people were like middle fingering me and saying F you and like speed up, buddy, and what are you doing? And so now I think I've got the judge, right? So the next day I go before the judge, and the attorney, I guess they give you an attorney. And so he told me, I said, listen, what should I do? And he says, listen, if you say innocent, you could have a trial, and he can put you in jail. So, I'm thinking to myself, I've got 4 little girls. I probably shouldn't have dad going to jail over some stupid infraction. So, but I go before the judge, and my kids are in the front row. My wife is there in this courtroom. The more I talk about this, the more this sounds like it couldn't have happened, but it definitely happened. So he goes, son, and he says, son, guilty or innocent? And I said, Your Honor, may I please show you footage of what happens when I go the speed limit? And he just gives me this little sly grin, and he says, son, I'm not going to watch your video. Innocent or guilty? So again, I have like 5 seconds to think through. Dad goes to jail over infraction. Children are haunted forever by the memory of their dad being taken off in chains. So I said, Your Honor, okay, guilty. And he says, go pay your fine. So I'm free. Now I go to pay the fine, and the fine is $500. $500. So that is where this entire movie started. And just spending the day there. But on a serious note, what inspired me that day was that, and again, nothing against the wonderful folks of Dixon, but I didn't see a lot going on in that town. I saw a gas station. I was at the Pizza Hut for lunch. I was a Holiday Inn. I think it was a Holiday Inn. And it just wasn't the most, exotic place in the world. And it just really reminded me that our leaders come from normal places like this. Yeah. And our leaders are often ordinary people. We think of Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Ronald Reagan, with the exception of the Trumps and the Bushes and the Roosevelts. Our leaders are really ordinary people from ordinary places that do extraordinary things. I think in particular, Japanese prime ministers are often the son, grandson of previous prime ministers, and it's sort of handed down like a legacy thing. And that's just not the case. And so that really got me thinking about Ronald Reagan and what an interesting story it was. And I was at Walden Media at the time, and so that's when I just began to develop the idea back in 2005.
I think one of the interesting things about the movie and your book is that it gives you such a new and fresh perspective on Reagan. The hits are obvious, the political moments that we all know, but it felt like your journey in making this movie allowed you to get to know him in so many profound ways. Maybe just share one little story from the book about meeting people who knew Reagan, who got to see him in a different sense, who connected with him. And because he just comes across as folksy and kind in a way that really doesn't really connect with politics, honestly.
That's a great question. Whatever the critics thought about them, it was often like they're critiquing him and not the movie. I think in that sense, we were faithful to him. And if you want to call some of his stuff cornball, sure. The way his love for Nancy by our modern standards, maybe it's a little cornball and the notes he wrote and stuff. But in any event, I don't take a lot of the criticism seriously, or personally, I should say, because I think a lot of it's directed at who Ronald Reagan was. And that's fair, if you want to. But I would, in the perfect world, I'd make that a separate critique and say, I don't like Ronald Reagan, but here's the movie.
Right.
Because a lot of the critics, even the worst critics, seem to think Dennis Quaid did a good job, which I appreciate that. But anyway, there's definitely a part of Reagan that is unknowable. His official biographer, Edmund Morris, essentially threw up his hands and said, I just can't figure him out. He called him inscrutable and kind of gave up and made this weird part novel, part historical book that nobody likes, really. And so there is a sense in which Ronald Reagan is, I think, intentionally inscrutable. He almost made it, I think he left breadcrumbs on the trail, but he almost made it difficult to get to know who he was intentionally. There's the senior quote in his high school yearbook is a great example of this. I don't have it in front of me, but I have it in the book. And it's like a couple of lines from a much longer poem. And people really couldn't figure out what he was talking about just based on those lines.
Yeah.
But one researcher went back and found the entire poem. And now it makes sense what he was trying to say here, but he makes it difficult. He doesn't make it easy. If you ever get a chance to visit the Reagan Ranch in Santa Barbara, you'll get a physical picture of Ronald Reagan, the man, because this place takes about 25 minutes from the highway to get to. It's winding roads and this and that, and this gate opens and closes. And I mean, it's literally, and then once you get there, it's like a paradise. But it's literally like, I guess we buy the houses that reflect our personalities. And this definitely reflects his personality because it's very, very hard to get to. Very few people got to see it. In fact, his close friend, Ed Meese, told me, I have never been there. And so when I told him that a painting that he had given to Reagan was in there, he was like, you're kidding. I never knew that. I never knew that he treasured my painting so much. But anyway, I had a chance to visit with about 55 of the people that knew him, worked with him. Of course, his son, Mike, was a big help. But it was really just a journey of trying to figure this man out. He truly is hard to figure out. But I would get little pieces from this person and that person. And it was interesting because a lot of the times, whether it was George Shultz or Ed Meese or all these people that worked with him, they would tell me, hey, I never told the biographer that about this, but here's the story. Or, you can't put this in the movie, but here's this. And one of the guys who told me that, he passed away, so I think I can tell the story. But jokes and things that he would do and say. And I asked Ed Meese, for instance, who's still alive. I said, Ed, you're probably the closest thing he has to a brother. What was it like? And he said, well, maybe so, but I could never get beyond a certain point emotionally. It's not like we would sit down and say, hey, how are you feeling? It was just a little bit of a barrier there that he said I could never get beyond. And even Nancy said the same thing. So anyway, all those people really helped give and it was very random, Christian. I talk in the book about, sometimes I would meet people very, very randomly. I'm sitting at a dinner one night, and there's a fortune teller sitting next to me, a really nice lady, but that was her, whatever she did. And she's like, oh, I knew Reagan. I went to school with his daughter. And then she tells me a great story about her and Ted Kennedy and Reagan. And then just the official people, of course. I was very, very careful with Mrs. Reagan and the Reagan Foundation. We never sought approval from her or anybody, just let them know what we were doing. Yeah. But I wanted the viewer to feel like this has integrity. It's not carrying the water for anybody or trying to make him look good. And so they were very respectful of those boundaries. They saw the movie at the very end, but had no input in terms of script or things like that.
talk about the movie now and to think about Dennis Quaid, who's so good, but he wasn't the first choice. There were other actors in the mix, and I want to let the viewers and the listeners kind of get the book and find out some of the actors. I want to keep some surprises, but I have to kind of mention one was Nicolas Cage that I had no idea. Seems like such a curveball, I think physically, but also a great actor who could probably do almost anything. I think he's playing John Madden in the near future. So is there a little bit of that story you can share right now about Nicolas Cage and your, the back and forth? It sounds like he was very respectful and very honest and kind of a straight shooter.
Yeah, just to clarify, Dennis Quaid was always my first choice, but he wasn't
Okay.
he wasn't available, and so there were periods of time. So we just we have to go, we have to do this, and so
Yeah.
But yeah, we had some great conversations with Nick Cage. He's an awesome person, and went out to Las Vegas. We had lunch out there. We had lunch out here in Beverly Hills, and yeah, he just look it would have taken a lot of hair and a lot of makeup, no doubt about it. But Nick Cage can do almost anything,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
it would have been interesting. It would have been a totally different movie. But those conversations ended up, we talked for quite a while. I think we went on for maybe a year or so. And I was sending him, I think I might have scared him with too many Reagan DVDs, because back when we had DVDs, I would burn DVDs and send him speeches and things. And,
Yeah.
but I think he just had to make a judgment call, what it would mean. I think he was prepared to do it, but, he has a lot of other projects. And this project, as you know from Dennis, it would have taken a lot out of his life.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Dennis was with us for like 6 years because of COVID and all the things that happened. So I'm so glad, though, that it worked out the way it was supposed to. And Dennis, as I said, Dennis required very little makeup and hair and, just put him out there.
Yeah.
One time when we were on set, and I remember going up to him and saying, just be Dennis Quaid. Don't try too hard to be Ronald Reagan. Just be, because you're already very close. A lot of similarities between Ronald Reagan and Dennis Quaid. His mother, very, very devout. Both of them very, very devout religious women. Their fathers, alcoholic types. And even their wives outshining them. Both of their wives at one point were more popular than them. Dennis would be the first one to tell you. He'd be walking down the street in New York City and they're screaming out his wife's name instead of his name. And Ronald Reagan experienced that with Jane Wyman as well. So, yeah, a lot of similarities.
Interesting. Obviously politics plays such a huge factor here. You had a GOP icon. You're working in Hollywood. There are all these different forces, and certainly the industry is not rushing to tell the story on the big screen like it deserves to be. Maybe give a quick example of how that became an obstacle. I mean, obviously, it sounds like Nicolas Cage was ready to kind of push past that. Others in the book, obviously that was a significant factor. But how would you describe that bump along the way? Because it wasn't modest. It was pretty sizable.
Yeah, I'm so thankful we had the road to ourselves. I kept waiting for another Reagan movie to pop up, and it was a combination of factors. At one point, there was going to be kind of a jokey version of Reagan has Alzheimer's and doesn't know he's the president or something.
Yes, with Will Ferrell.
With Will Ferrell. That poor Will Ferrell. This is how I know what happened to that poor man. So sometimes people would mistake our Facebook page for that movie that was announced, and we would get all the nasty messages.
Yeah, you were very kind in the book about that chapter of this saga, because I think I would have pulled less punches than you did, but continue.
Well, I remember at the time, they announced that movie, and it was like a award-winning script, just going to be great. And of course, the world went nuts about it when it was announced. And within 48 hours, Will backs out of it and says, "Oh, I maybe met that guy once. He has a script." Total backtrack. But on our Facebook page, somebody had written, "Will Ferrell graduated from such and such high school in Orange County. He's on the wall of fame at his high school. Call this number and demand he be taken off the wall of fame of his high school."
Wow.
This is how serious Reagan fans are. And so I think the combination of when people wanted to make a movie, it was going to be outrageous to the fans. So that closed that down. And then there were other attempts with Michael Douglas and various things. But I think, this is a tough area, because if you make a film that attacks that character, that person, let's say if you make a Jackie Robinson film and you tick off his fans, who is the audience for your movie? I don't know, like racist. I don't know who the film. So it's not that you have to suck up to the fans, but you want to be fair. And if the fans feel like you're being fair to their guy, then I don't know if it makes sense. I guess there's Vice, I guess, which I don't think Dick Cheney fans are rushing out to see, but it's something you have to think about if you're making a biopic. And we just tried to treat Reagan. I didn't treat him like a politician. We just treated him like a character, like Jackie Robinson, or any biopic you've seen of a musician. So I think maybe that's where some of the outrage was, that we didn't try to treat him as a political person, or get out our pet projects that we didn't like him because he did this. It's really more about the man. And part of it was, as I talk about in the book, John Avildsen was originally going to be our director. And John directed Rocky, of course. And John really helped set the tone, even though it turned out he passed away and we had to part company just before that. But he would say to me, Mark, remember that Rocky was not about boxing. It just happened to be his occupation. And we've got to treat Reagan the same way, that this is about the man. And happens to be he's in politics, but he could have been, a custodian. It's really about him overcoming a lot of failures in his life, challenges that he faces. And so that was that was our lodestar, our guiding star.
This may sound like a hokey question in a way, but to make this project happen, you had to be a counselor, you had to be a negotiator, you had to be a psychiatrist. I mean, it's amazing all the different skills you had to draw upon to make each part of this happen, whether it was, getting the funding, getting the actors, working with the director, working with the writer. Do you feel like this is, you're already an established veteran in this industry, but do you feel like you emerged from this whole saga with sort of a better skill set, a better understanding? Do you think, oh my gosh, why did I even get into this business? I mean, I just can't, I can't imagine not being changed by this whole process. And I know that you tried to remove your ego from it, and that was a key part of the book and the production, but how do you emerge from this whole situation? I mean, I don't know. It's a very vague question, but it just seems like such a life-changing experience. It wasn't just a movie. It was so much more.
Yes. And if you have a young person in your life who wants to go into filmmaking, I encourage you to give them this book and talk him or her out of it, and go into dentistry or something more sensible. Anything, right. It's a very long and arduous road, and you have to wear all those hats like you were talking about. People often ask, what does a producer do? And you're like a combination of an architect and a general contractor, and you know what you want to do, but you have to find the right people to help you with it. I mean, that's a huge part of it, is assembling that team. And it's not just the producing side, but also the marketing side. And we kind of functioned as a studio as well. I mean, we developed it. We had a great partner at the end in Showbiz, and of course, Lionsgate and Universal helped with the rest of it. But essentially, all the work was done by our team, and it took a long time. And just the way that funding works, often funding is against foreign sales or foreign pre-sales, and we don't really have that in our case. It's very difficult to. It's a very American story. So all the normal mechanisms that are used to fund a movie are really not in play for us. So just for your audience sake, if you were making a movie with Nicolas Cage, you would go to Germany and Italy and France and wherever and collect money from all those places and say, hey, we'll give you the movie, and then give us the money. And that's how often movies are financed. But in our case, I don't think Ronald Reagan doesn't have that kind of a reach. So we just had to do things in a different way. But to answer your question, and then throw in COVID on top of that. It just really, made life really challenging to drive out. I had to drive out to Oklahoma in an RV and stay in an RV. And we arrived on set, and my team, my director Sean McNamara and John Sullivan, our co-producer, and others were already there. But just to give you a flavor of what it was like when I arrived there, we had an amazing COVID coordinator. She was great, but she was very tough, and she just cracked the whip. And I said, well, can I go to a restaurant? She goes, no. I said, well, can I go to Walmart? She goes like that. That's the most dangerous place in this entire city. You cannot go to Walmart. Yeah. So, well, how am I supposed to eat? I literally asked, what am I supposed to do? And she said, we'll deliver groceries to your door every morning. Tell us what you want. And so literally we couldn't have any interaction with the locals. I think we went to a restaurant like one time the entire 3 months. So it was really a challenging thing. And to this day, Christian, there are people that I don't know what they look like below their nose, and I'm like, oh, that's what you look like.
Yeah.
So it was really, and then because of there was just no flexibility in the rules at that time. There weren't like common sense flexibility. So if you remember, I'm on a set with hundreds and hundreds of people, and if one person got COVID, the entire set had to shut down for 10 days. Just can't. It's just not functional. So we were shut down for 20 days, and those are days that I have to pay salaries for everybody. They're quarantined, the one people who got it. So I mean, a sensible thing would have been to say, the person who came down with COVID, who did you have contact with in the last 3 days? All you guys are isolated. They didn't do that. It was the entire set, and it was just incredibly challenging.
One of the few perks of the delay and the delay and the delay was, by the time the movie came out late last year, there was a whole new media empire where you could have Dennis Quaid on Joe Rogan and all these different platforms that really didn't have the power, the cultural heft that they do now. I mean, I would think that part of the film's success was that landscape and leveraging not just Dennis, but other people in that arena. Can you talk about that and how important that was? Because this was not the kind of movie where you're going to get wall-to-wall coverage in the traditional press.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're right. And I think we're the first film to really focus on podcasts. We saw it developing. I just remember when certain people that developed their podcasts, I began to watch, and I saw the change happening. And literally, I personally, at some point changed from coming home and turning on my cable stations to coming home and turning on my YouTube channel. Yeah. And then seeing all the podcasters. And the good thing is you can see the numbers, like literally you can see, oh, wow, 1 million people watched it. And so we jumped in. I think we pioneered the podcast strategy, and I think you've seen a few after us do it. Kevin Costner did a few. You're starting to see a few. Mel Gibson did a couple of things. Yeah. But, I had kind of warned Dennis ahead of time that, we really have a different way of communicating. My background with Walden and all these places that I've been in the past, it's a totally different way of marketing films. And we didn't do things perfectly, but it is a strategy of making sure our lead talent is available. And we just wrote that into the contract and provided for him the resources he would need to do that. And he just gave it his all. I mean, I have Dennis, not only the performance in the movie, but going on Joe Rogan and all these incredible shows. So that was definitely, a strategy. I think you'll see Hollywood doing more and more of that if they're smart, to really make talent available and going on those shows. And again, you can see literally, the ratings. I mean, in real time, you can see the number of people who watch these shows. But we began Dennis's portion of the marketing back before the film even came out, when we announced it on the Megyn Kelly show, on the Today Show, actually. And so Megyn Kelly came out to the Reagan Ranch, and then Dennis was out there. Probably the most interesting and fun and weird thing we did was Pawn Stars. Both Dennis and John Voight did a Pawn Stars episode. And in the case of, just to give you the numbers, in the case of Dennis, so the joke was he comes, a buddy of mine sells the poster signed by Dennis on the show. And then Dennis is called in to authenticate the signature. So that little segment in total got about 30 million views over the course of all kinds of various different ways that it was seen on TV, online. And so it's definitely, and then we measured the awareness of the movie, just like you'd do a political campaign. And as far as I know, we're the first to ever do it, but we would periodically poll. The question would be to the American people would be, have you heard of a movie on Ronald Reagan starring Dennis Quaid? And we began at 8%, 10%, 14%. And by the end, the last week, we were at 84%. So the awareness was there. And I think, though, that on the other side of things, we definitely came straight into the headwinds of people wanting to watch movies at home. And it's just a reality that we've had to just deal with. I've had so many people say, I cannot wait to watch a film when it's in my house. And I'm like, well, it's in a theater. Well, yeah, I like to watch it at home now. And then we did a poll that 63% of people want to watch movies at home versus the theater. So that's the reality we faced.
The fact that there's a movie about Ronald Reagan of this kind, it's out there now, truly matters in the pop culture landscape, because this will live on whether it goes to Netflix eventually, whether it's on different streaming channels, whether it, however people consume the media, they will see it. And, headlines fade and the lessons from your childhood schooling, fades as well. But talk about the importance of this as a pop culture touchstone, because I think you're one of the very few people that I know, like an Andrew Clavin and you're as well, Mark, that you understand there's a necessity for this. This isn't just a movie that comes in and out of theaters. This has a life of its own now. It exists, and people will see it and take something fresh out of it that they may never get from other pieces of information.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think of how movies have affected me, and I'm sure they've affected you too. And I still carry them with me 40 years later. And,
Yeah.
And I remember when we were looking for that director, and my friend Ralph Winter, who didn't end up producing it with me, but Ralph said, "Well, what's your favorite movie?" I said, "Well, I always loved Rocky." He goes, "Well, go find that guy." and that's how I found John Avildsen. I'm like, "Well, he's probably dead by now." And he's like, "Nope, he's 81 years old and still kicking it." But I think of how that movie affected me, and just spending time with John Avildsen. We would have lunch together often, and he would tell me these great stories from Rocky, and I tried to be cool and not let on what a fan I was.
Yeah.
But the truth is that his movie impacted me as a young man growing up, and for us 80s kids, it was like Rocky was like our instructor on how to be a man. You got to be tough in the ring, but then you got to be kind to Adrian. It's like all those things that we learned, and so. Yeah, that's exciting to think. Who knows how this movie will impact people? And obviously, we took a critics drubbing, but we've applied to Guinness World Book of Records for the greatest gap between moviegoers and critics. Critics like you. No, we were at. And look at Christian. I usually shoot for 49. 49 is my target because that was the score for The Passion of the Christ. And so I always feel like 49 means it's a really good work, but it's being punished for philosophical reasons. But I did not expect 18. That was beyond my expectations. But I think that 98 for people who saw it on Rotten Tomatoes and 18 for critics. In a way, it's ironic because it really is like Ronald Reagan himself. The really smart people in Washington literally thought he was an idiot. Clark Clifford, famously, like the most respected statesman in Washington, when Reagan came to Washington, called him an amiable dunce. And this is not the guy who's going to, help bring the Cold War to an end or be a strong president. Really, he was just really an idiot. Even Nixon was not a fan. Kind of thought he was a lightweight. And I think Reagan, kind of in a perverse way, Reagan kind of cultivated that image. I think he used it to his advantage. If he's the guy who's takes a lot of naps and is an idiot, your opponents let their guard down. And I think that Reagan actually thought that one through and purposely cultivated that kind of an image because it helped him. I'll give you an example of the way his mind worked. Two of the lessons that I learned from his friends. One was that you'll never see a picture of Ronald Reagan with his arms around somebody with a suit coat on because it rumples his suit coat and it would make it look, and he's always about getting the picture right. But on the red carpet, he would often position himself, as you face the camera, he'd position himself on the very left side. So if you're looking at a picture, you'll see him on the very left side. And people would think, so there's like him and Errol Flynn and John Wayne or whatever. And people would think, oh, what a modest fellow he is. Well, not really. He's thinking ahead later to the captions. And he gets mentioned first in the captions if he's on the very side. So he's not a dumb person, and he thinks things through. And in terms of the other insight that I got from one of his aides, Arthur Laffer, was that he said the very first moment I met Ronald Reagan in 1978, I knew that he was the son of an alcoholic. And I said, well, why? He said, well, because everything was perfect. No, not a hair out of place, suit, everything was just, and he said, I often find with alcoholic children that they don't want to tick off their dad. And so they will try to present themselves as perfectly as possible all the time visually. And so those are the kind of insights that I kind of gleaned from people that I met.
Yeah. Well, there's so much of that kind of content, those kind of details in Making Reagan. It's available right now at Amazon.com or your favorite bookseller. And of course, you can see Reagan, the movie itself, on your favorite video on demand platform. It's funny, before I let you go, there was a great Saturday Night Live sketch back in the day with Phil Hartman that played into that Reagan as a dunce image, and then it showed him as this Machiavellian figure. It was brilliant. It was funny. it was irreverent, and they would never do it today. But did kind of capture that sort of
It was
pull and the
hilarious.
tug between his real person and the image that he portrayed. But
Yeah, there'd be Girl Scouts coming around, cookies, and then they would leave, and he'd put on the map, and like, we're attacking here. It wasn't quite like that, but there is some truth to that. And look, and he had this ability to combine, being tough, but also being kind with people. And Trump and Reagan are very much contrast. One is raised in New York City, has to deal with the mob and the unions and all this stuff, and then one is a Midwestern, more polite. And so, but they're both tough.
Yeah.
But definitely different kinds of toughness.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you put through all the work, all the heartache, all the perseverance, all the juggling to make this all happen. It's here. The film is out now, and the book, of course, the book is as well. Mark, thank you so much for your time. And like I said, if you've got a kid who is curious about the Hollywood, have them read this book and then have a long conversation. I think it's
dentistry.
That's right.
There will always be teeth that need to be worked on.
That's right. But someone's got to do it. You did it. Thank you so much for your efforts, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Christian.
Your character actor of the week is Stephen Tobolowsky. Before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to rapper/musician Tom McDonald. Now, Tom is a star. He's a star on YouTube. He's a star in the music charts, and he's doing it basically by himself. No big record label, no big publicity team behind him pushing out his songs, bothering radio stations to play his music. It's really all him. Now, one caveat, his girlfriend is Nova Rockefeller, and she directs the videos to his music, and they are quite good. I mean, she's a very talented soul, but this tag team duo does it on their own, all by themselves, and they rock the charts over and over again. His videos get millions of views. He's a sensation, and he recently reached out to me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and asked if I wanted to contribute to his newest music video. It's called Can't Cancel All of Us, and it's a battle cry for everyone who's been pressured, who's been canceled, who's been told, you can't say that, you can't have that opinion. And many, many people have suffered over the last few years because of that cultural trend. And this is his finger in the eye to those who tried to do it, who made that whole cultural revolution possible, and to say, hey, you know what? You can cancel all of us. That time, that might be over. And thank goodness for that. So if anybody could wreck a music career, it's me. But I think my brief appearance in his new music video won't do the damage that it could. But all kidding aside, thank you, Tom McDonald, for being a pioneer, for being a free spirit, for inviting me also briefly into your musical world, and just being a guy who just tells it like it is. We need more of that. So thanks, Tom. And this will be my first and last music video. I promise. 'Cause you can't cancel all of us, and you're more than welcome to try. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause we're standing here side by side. Well, that's the show this week. Thank you again to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And if you get a chance, check out HollywoodInToto.com. It is the right take on entertainment, just like this podcast, updated 7 days a week, because I don't want to have a day off. Who needs that, right? But I will see you all next time. But for now, please be good, be kind, and have the best day possible. Doctor's orders.